At the beginning of World War II, air superiority became the decisive factor in military strategy. What had been a supporting element in World War I became a dominant force that shaped operations on the ground and influenced the outcome of entire campaigns. Germany understood this earlier than any other nation. The Luftwaffe became the spearhead of blitzkrieg, destroying infrastructure, suppressing defenses, and breaking enemy communications. While German armored divisions advanced, the Luftwaffe cleared the sky for them. The Allies faced a challenge unlike anything their armies had experienced before. The enemy controlled the air. By 1941, the situation had become critical. German fighters such as the Messerschmitt Bf 109 and the Focke-Wulf FW 190 dominated the European sky. They were fast, maneuverable, and lethal in the hands of experienced pilots. The Luftwaffe destroyed British and Soviet aircraft by the hundreds. When American bombers began strategic raids over Germany, they suffered catastrophic losses. Flying without adequate fighter escort, they were often attacked long before they reached their targets. In some 1942 bombing raids, U.S. air losses exceeded 20%, a level that did not indicate risk, but certain disaster. The problem, however, was deeper than German aircraft superiority. The United States had entered the war with a flawed aviation doctrine. American command believed that heavily armed bombers, the B-17 Flying Fortress and the B-24 Liberator, could defend themselves without fighter escort. This belief was a strategic illusion. Escort fighters were not optional, they were essential. Yet all American fighters of the time lacked the range to escort bombers deep into German territory. They were forced to turn back long before the bombers reached their targets. At that point, the bombers were exposed and became easy prey for the Luftwaffe. The Allies did not lose the air war because they lacked aircraft. They lost because they lacked a concept of air warfare. Without escort fighters, bombing missions became costly and strategically pointless. American generals continued to insist that the bomber will always get through, but the front lines proved the opposite. The Luftwaffe destroyed entire bomber groups before they reached their targets. The war had revealed a brutal truth. Without control of the air, there could be no offensive operations, no pressure on the enemy, and no path to victory. By late 1942, the situation became urgent. If the United States did not solve the escort problem, it would lose the air war. What was needed was not just a new aircraft, but a new idea, a fighter with the speed and agility to face German interceptors, and with the range to escort bombers all the way to their target and back. It had to operate at high altitude, survive deep over enemy territory, and win air battles far from friendly bases. This was not a tactical requirement, it was a strategic necessity. Such an aircraft already existed, but no one yet realized what it would become. It had been built quietly, without ambition, without fanfare, and with little expectation. It was not designed to change the war. It was designed simply to exist. Its name was the P-51 Mustang. The P-51 Mustang did not begin its career as a legendary aircraft. It was not admired, it was not trusted, and it certainly was not considered a turning point in the war. In fact, when it first appeared, many officers saw it as a failed design, a temporary solution created to satisfy British demand rather than American strategic needs. In 1940, the British Purchasing Commission approached North American Aviation with an urgent request: build a fighter aircraft, fast. Instead of producing an existing model under license, North American proposed a new design, what would become the Mustang. There was no time for deep engineering refinement. The first prototype had to be built in just 120 days. The result was a technically impressive aircraft with advanced aerodynamics, but it lacked a clear role in the war. The Mustang entered service with the Allison V1710 engine. It was reliable at low altitude but lost power dramatically above 4,000 to 5,000 meters. Unfortunately, high altitude was exactly where the war was being fought, where German interceptors attacked Allied bombers. The Mustang could not compete with aircraft like the Bf 109 or FW 190 in this environment. Instead, it was used in low-level missions, reconnaissance, ground attack, and convoy protection. In these auxiliary roles, it was seen as just another aircraft, useful but unremarkable. But the problem went beyond the engine. The Mustang had been built for British needs, not American doctrine. The U.S. Army Air Forces already relied on the P-38 Lightning, the P-39 Airacobra, and the P-40 Warhawk. They saw no reason to introduce another fighter. The Mustang was not part of their long-term plans and was never considered a priority aircraft. It was treated as a limited support fighter rather than a strategic solution. Early combat reports confirmed this skepticism. Pilots praised its handling, stability, and range, but none of that mattered if it failed at altitude. The Mustang had no reputation, no strategic purpose, and no supporters in high command. Even the British, who had originally ordered it, were disappointed. They needed a high-altitude interceptor, and the Mustang could not fill that role. Some American officers openly dismissed the aircraft, calling it a machine without a future. It entered service in small numbers and was distributed among secondary units. It was used because it existed, nothing more. But in 1942, a small group of engineers in Britain made a proposal that would change aviation history. They suggested replacing the Allison engine with the Rolls-Royce Merlin, the same engine that had powered the Spitfire in the Battle of Britain. It was a risky idea, combining an American airframe with a British power plant. No one knew if the Mustang structure could handle the increased power, or if it would fly at all. That experiment changed everything. It did not happen by order of a general. It happened because a few engineers recognized potential where others saw failure. The Mustang had not yet become a legend, but for the first time it had a future. The turning point in the Mustang's history did not come from American high command. It did not come from a strategic directive or a visionary general. It came from engineering logic. In 1942, British engineers from Rolls-Royce carefully examined the P-51's design and saw what others had missed. The aircraft had extraordinary aerodynamic potential held back only by an inadequate engine. With its laminar flow wing, clean fuselage lines, and efficient structure, the Mustang had one of the best airframes of the war. But as long as it used the Allison engine, it would remain mediocre. The British made a bold proposal: install the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine in the Mustang. This was the same engine that had powered the Spitfire in the Battle of Britain, the engine that had stopped the Luftwaffe in 1940. Unlike the Allison, the Merlin used a two-stage supercharger, delivering power at high altitude, exactly where bomber escort fighters were needed most. The first Merlin-powered Mustang prototype flew in October 1942. The results were immediate and astonishing. The aircraft now climbed faster, retained power at altitude, and reached speeds that placed it among the fastest fighters in the world. It did not lose its agility. It did not lose its range. It simply became better in every combat parameter that mattered. But the reaction within the United States was slow. The transformation of the Mustang was seen as a British engineering experiment rather than a U.S. military solution. American Air Force leadership was still committed to the P-38 Lightning and the P-47 Thunderbolt. They resisted the Mustang not because it was inferior, but because it was not part of their doctrine. It had not been designed in Washington, it had not been planned in their strategy, and it challenged their assumptions. The breakthrough came not in a conference room but in flight reports. Operational test flights with the new engine proved that the Mustang could outperform German fighters at altitude. It showed exceptional range, excellent energy retention in maneuvers, and clean handling even in high-speed dives. For the first time, the Allies had a fighter that could escort bombers deep into German airspace and still be capable of air superiority combat. The new version was designated the P-51B. It was not just an upgraded aircraft, it was a new class of weapon. It had speed. It had range. It had altitude performance. It had the ability to fight anywhere the war demanded. But most importantly, it had something no other Allied fighter had: strategic reach. The Mustang was no longer an experiment. It was no longer an aircraft without a purpose. It had become the answer to the question that determined the future of the air war. How do you take control of the sky and keep it? The true advantage of the Mustang was not immediately recognized. Many pilots and commanders focused on speed, maneuverability, and firepower when comparing fighters. But the war over Europe was not won by speed alone. It was won by range, the ability to fly deep into enemy territory, stay in combat, and return home. The Mustang was the first Allied fighter that could do that. Before the Mustang, U.S. bombers flew into Germany without continuous protection. Fighters like the P-38 Lightning and P-47 Thunderbolt could escort them only part of the way. Then, short on fuel, they would turn back. From that moment on, the bombers were exposed. German interceptors waited for this moment and attacked with overwhelming force. The Luftwaffe didn't need to defeat the entire bomber force. It only had to wait until the escorts disappeared. The Mustang changed that. With its laminar flow wing and Merlin engine, it had significantly lower fuel consumption than other American fighters. Equipped with drop tanks, it could fly longer and farther than any Allied escort fighter before it. For the first time, bombers had an escort all the way to the target, even to Berlin and back. This broke the strategy of the Luftwaffe. German pilots had built their tactics around predictable escort limits. They knew exactly when American fighters had to withdraw. But now that safe zone vanished. The Mustang could fight over Germany itself, above enemy airfields, industrial regions, and transport hubs. It took the battle to the Luftwaffe, forcing German fighters into defensive combat far from their own bases. The Mustang gave the Allies something they never had before: offensive air power. Instead of staying close to the bombers, Mustang pilots received a new order: seek and destroy enemy aircraft. They were told to break formation, to hunt German fighters, and to eliminate them wherever they were found. Air war ceased to be a defensive struggle. It became a systematic assault on German air capability. The Mustang didn't just protect bombers. It went after the Luftwaffe directly, and it never had to stop at the German border. That was the moment when the United States gained not just air support but air dominance. And for the Luftwaffe, it was only the beginning of collapse. The arrival of the Mustang with the Merlin engine did more than strengthen Allied air power. It changed the entire logic of air warfare. Until 1944, escort fighters had a defensive role. Their mission was to protect bombers. But once the Mustang demonstrated its superiority in speed, range, and high-altitude performance, its mission changed. It was no longer a shield, it became a weapon. In early 1944, the U.S. 8th Air Force introduced a new strategy: offensive fighter sweeps. Mustang squadrons were ordered not just to escort bombers, but to leave the formation and hunt down German aircraft. This marked the beginning of a new phase of the air war, a phase in which the objective was not to survive combat, but to destroy the Luftwaffe. Mustang units began targeting German airfields, catching fighter groups during takeoff and landing, the most vulnerable moments for any pilot. They also attacked hangars, engine depots, ammunition stores, fuel reserves, and maintenance facilities. The objective was clear: dismantle the Luftwaffe's fighting ability piece by piece. The Mustang was now used not just to win dogfights, but to remove the enemy's ability to fight at all. The energy of the Mustang in combat became one of its most feared advantages. It could dive faster than the Bf-109 and regain altitude more efficiently than the FW-190. This allowed Mustang pilots to control the engagement, attack when they chose and disengage when necessary. They no longer fought the Luftwaffe on German terms. From now on, German pilots fought on Mustang's terms. The psychological shift was just as significant as the tactical one. The Luftwaffe had once operated with confidence, dictating battles in the air. But by 1944, German pilots found themselves constantly reacting, constantly defending, constantly being hunted. Mustang groups began to dominate the air not by superior numbers, but by superior initiative. Germany could still build aircraft, but it could no longer replace pilots at the rate it was losing them. Each downed German fighter meant the loss of a trained pilot, and by 1944, training standards had collapsed. The Luftwaffe was no longer losing machines. It was losing its future. The Mustang did not defeat the Luftwaffe in a single decisive battle. It defeated it by removing its ability to continue the war. Air superiority was no longer a goal. It had become reality, controlled, enforced, and expanded by the Mustang. By mid-1944, the Luftwaffe was no longer the force that had once dominated Europe. It was collapsing, not in a dramatic moment, but through a steady, relentless process of destruction. The Mustang was at the center of that process, not because it was undefeated in dogfights, but because it took away the Luftwaffe's ability to function as an air force. Germany was losing aircraft faster than it could replace them. Allied bombing campaigns targeted engine factories, ball-bearing production, fuel refineries, and transport networks. Aircraft production continued, but without engines, fuel, and spare parts, many aircraft never left the ground. Meanwhile, Mustang units increasingly attacked German airfields directly, destroying fighters before they even had a chance to take off. But the real crisis for the Luftwaffe was not mechanical, it was human. Germany entered the war with a corps of highly trained pilots, many of them combat veterans before 1939. But by 1944, these veterans were gone, lost in years of continuous fighting. Replacement pilots were rushed through training programs. Flight training hours dropped from 240 to 110, then to 80, and eventually to as low as 40 hours before frontline deployment. Many recruits reached combat without ever firing their guns in live training. They faced Mustang groups flown by experienced Allied pilots with full radar coordination, ground support, and numerical advantage. What used to be air combat became a one-sided hunt. Germany was no longer able to choose when to fight. The Mustang forced them to fight and punished them for it. The turning point came during Operation Big Week in February 1944. The objective was simple: destroy the Luftwaffe once and for all. Mustang squadrons were unleashed in coordinated attacks deep over Germany. In a single week, Germany lost hundreds of aircraft and irreplaceable pilots. It was not a tactical defeat. It was the moment the Luftwaffe began an irreversible decline. From that point forward, German air strategy no longer focused on winning. It focused on delaying defeat. The Luftwaffe had lost the sky. The Mustang had taken it and would not give it back. The P-51 Mustang is often remembered as the greatest fighter of World War II. But that title does not come from legend or myth. It comes from results. The Mustang did not win because it was the fastest aircraft. It was not the most heavily armed. It did not have the strongest engine. It won because it was part of something greater, a system built to win a war. The true power of the Mustang came from three things. 1. Industry. The Mustang could be built in large numbers, serviced quickly, and repaired on the front lines. Germany built excellent aircraft, but not in the numbers required to keep fighting. The Mustang overwhelmed the Luftwaffe not by being invincible, but by being relentless. 2. Range and strategy. The Mustang did not just fly. It reached. It followed bombers into the heart of Germany and still had fuel to fight. It erased the Luftwaffe's tactical advantage and ended the concept of a safe zone in German airspace. 3. Organization. Germany relied on elite pilots. The United States relied on coordinated tactics, group combat, radar support, and teamwork. The Luftwaffe lost pilots faster than it could train them. The Mustang accelerated that collapse by forcing combat on German terms and winning. The Mustang did not just support the Allied advance. It made it possible. Without control of the air, D-Day would not have succeeded. Allied troops would not have been supplied. Bombing of German industry would not have continued. The war would have lasted longer and cost far more lives. The Mustang did not win the war alone, but it made Germany's defeat inevitable. That is why the P-51 Mustang is not just a fighter plane. It is a lesson in warfare. Victory belongs not to the weapon that looks strongest, but to the one that works.